Welcome, brothers and sisters, ladies and gentlemen, to the new black media. Today's video is about white people. What are we going to do to stop white nationalism? Readers sound off in the USA Today opinion on August 10th, 2019. This letter reads, "Deny white nationalism its base. Letter to the editor." This weekend, when I heard about the white nationalist hate-fueled mass shooting in El Paso, Texas, a place where I once worked and studied, I went through a range of emotions. I experienced shock, concern for my loved ones, sadness, and rage. I'm stuck on rage. My rage is directed at white nationalists who claim that their inhumane acts are in the service of protecting America for white people. They are attacking and killing people of color and have the nerve to say that they are somehow doing it on my behalf. White people, what are we going to do about this? Question mark. Silence. I am challenging my rage into responsibility. It is my responsibility to reclaim my voice and use it in the service of making the world more just. I am making a commitment, and I invite my fellow white people to join me. I commit to working with people to dismantle racism, whether it expresses itself in the hand holding a gun or the hand signing an executive order. Now is the time to speak out in every space we're in. Now is the time to build organizations to combat racism. Now is the time to deny white nationalism its base of white people. That was written by Lee Gargagliano of Oakland, California. Now, I might have chopped up your name. I apologize, but kudos for your letter to the editor. While we're on the subject, though, of denying white nationalism its base of white people, let's say for the record that there's a lot of denial of white nationalism. There's a lot of denial of white racism. There's a lot of denial of white extremists, identity extremists, that is. There's a lot of denial of all of these things that deal with white supremacy. They are on a propaganda parade, marching around on all the media outlets, it seems, acting as if white supremacy is not the issue. And so they bring up and talk about all day long gun control. We've been having this discussion, but never have we had a decent, intelligent conversation about white nationalism and white supremacy, which equates to white terrorism globally. We need to have this discussion. So, we're moving on to the dying of whiteness. Why racism is at the heart of America's gun inaction. That was published in The Guardian. Why does the United States refuse to pass new gun control laws? It's the question that people around the world keep asking. Well, yes, because when you're on the outside, you could see that it may appear to be guns, but in actuality, outsiders, it happens to be white supremacy that is at the head of this problem. But according to Dr. Jonathan Metzl, a psychiatrist and sociologist at Vanderbilt University, white supremacy is the key to understanding America's gun debate. In his new book, Dying of Whiteness, How the Politics of Racial Resentment is Killing America's Heartland, Metzel argues that the intensity and polarization of the U.S. gun debate makes much more sense when understood in the context of whiteness and white privilege. Well, before I continue, let me just say in virtual reality, on the few games rather that I do play when I want to release my mind from the rather more serious things, even the white supremacists online, they deny white privilege. They deny white supremacy. They deny white racism. And we know that they understand it and that they really truly know, just like everybody else around the world knows. But people are pretending to not know, especially when black people are talking about it. They pretend to not know. So while I'm on this subject, I have a question for all of you who are listening to this video right now, that you might have friends who are Asian, Indian, Mexican or Latino or Spanish. Some of your friends who might be white. I ask you, do they help you or talk to you about white supremacy and how to get around this and how we can fight this and dismantle this system? Do they even offer any suggestions whatsoever? Or as your friend, do they even care? And if not, why not? And what kind of friend does that make them to you? But I digress. So, white Americans attempt to defend their status in the racial hierarchy by opposing issues like gun control, healthcare expansion, or public school funding ends up injuring themselves, as well as hurting people of color, Metzel argues. The majority of America's gun death victims are white men, and most of them die from self-inflicted gunshot wounds. In all, gun suicide claims the lives of 25,000 Americans each year. White Americans are, quote, dying for a cause, unquote, he writes, even if their form of death is often slow, excruciating, and invisible. Metzel spoke to The Guardian about his analysis this March and again this week, following what happened to be a white nationalist terror attack on Latino families doing back-to-school shopping at a Walmart in El Paso, Texas, that left 22 people dead. The conversations have been condensed and edited. I will leave a link in the description to where you can go through and read this article, but it finishes off by saying, in my research, I look at the history and the social meanings of how guns came to be these particularly charged social symbols. So many aspects of American gun culture are really entwined with whiteness and white privilege. Carrying a gun in public has been coded as a white privilege. Advertisers have literally used words like restoring your manly privilege, unquote, as a way of selling assault weapons to white men. In colonial America, landowners could carry guns, and they bestowed that right onto poor whites in order to quell uprising from, quote, Negroes and Indians, which were both one and the same. They were the natives here before white people got here in America. But nonetheless, John Brown's raid was about weapons. Scholars have written about how the Ku Klux Klan was aimed at disarming African Americans. And isn't that ironic? They still do that today, but they do it in the form of police officers trying to aim at disarming African Americans. The Ku Klux Klan does that today in many different guises, where they try to disarm African Americans. Give your guns for free week down at the youth center. You can turn in your gun for free, no questions asked, and those type of things. But when African Americans started to carry guns in public. Think about Malcolm X during the Civil Rights era. All of a sudden, the Second Amendment didn't apply in many white Americans' minds. When Huey Newton and the Black Panthers tried to arm themselves, everyone suddenly said, "We need gun control." When states like Missouri changed their laws to allow open carry of firearms, there were parades of white Americans who would carry big long guns through congested areas of downtown St. Louis, who would go into places like Walmart and burrito restaurants carrying their guns. And they were coded as patriots. At the same time, there were all the stories about African American gun owners who would go to Walmart and get tackled and shot. Who gets to carry a gun in public? Question mark. Who is coded as a patriot? Question mark. Who is coded as a threat or terrorist or a gangster? Question mark. What it means to carry a gun or own a gun or buy a gun, those questions are not neutral. We have 200 years of history or more defining that in very racial terms. The period after a mass shooting is often very telling. When the shooter is white, the context is the individual narrative. This individual disordered white mind, usually titled mentally ill. When the shooter is black or brown, all of a sudden the disorder or mental illness is cultural, is culture. The narrative we tell then is about terrorism or gangs. Then there's the quiet, everyday level. There's nothing more painful than sitting in a room with family members who have lost loved ones to suicide. I talked to people who had lost husbands, wives, kids, parents to gun suicide. And they would come to the interview often bringing their guns. And I would ask them, did it change how you think about guns? And they'd argue, it's never the gun's fault, and they need the gun in case an invader would attack them. This narrative about protection against the radicalized invader was so profound, they were almost nervous not bringing their guns. Thanks for watching. Peace out.